Amina had eaten nothing for 2 days, yet as she walked through the shimmering heat of the village road, clutching her last coin, she wasn't thinking of hunger. She was thinking of survival. But when she saw a stranger collapse beneath the lone acacia tree, her heartbeat faltered, tightening with the kind of fear that didn't belong to her body, but to her spirit. And in that split second, she realized that the universe was asking her to choose between saving herself or saving someone she had never met. Amina had spent most of her life wrapped in a quiet kind of poverty, the kind that didn't scream through torn clothes or begging hands, but hid itself behind resilience and grace. She lived alone in a tiny mud brick house on the edge of the village, supporting herself with odd jobs, washing clothes for neighbors, sorting cassava at the market, or helping elder women prepare spices. Her mother had passed years ago, leaving her with nothing but a set of worn recipes and a single promise: never let hardship steal the goodness from your heart. Amina had held on to those words like a guiding lantern through every dark season. The day was unbearably hot, the kind of heat that blurred the horizon into waves. Amina's thin frame shivered despite the sun. Hunger had hollowed her strength, until even walking felt like a negotiation with her body. She had saved this one coin, her last, for a small bowl of porridge. The thought of finally tasting food made her mouth ache. Yet something deeper than hunger lived inside her, a stubborn determination to keep her dignity, even when her stomach cried for mercy. That was when she saw him. A man lay slumped near the roots of an acacia tree, his head resting awkwardly, his arms limp at his sides. His clothes were dusty, as though he had walked miles without rest. His chest rose unevenly, each breath shallow, each blink slow. He looked dehydrated, lost, fading. There was something in the angle of his exhaustion that pierced Amina with a strange familiarity, like the silent suffering she had carried for years had taken physical form before her. She approached carefully, the dusty road crunching beneath her bare feet. Even before she reached him, she could feel his weakness like a whisper in the air. His lips were cracked, his skin flushed, his eyes unfocused. Amina knelt beside him, her heart pounding with both fear and instinct. She gently touched his shoulder. His eyes lifted, meeting hers with a mixture of desperation and disbelief. "Water," he tried to murmur, but the word barely escaped his throat. Amina's chest tightened painfully. She looked at her coin again. Small, dull, weighty. It wasn't just money. It was her survival. But as she stared at him, something inside her shifted. She remembered the nights when she had sat alone, praying for someone, anyone, to show her kindness. She remembered how often she had hoped for help that never came. And then she remembered her mother's promise. Before she could stop herself, she took the man's hand and pressed the coin into it. His fingers instinctively curled around it, trembling. He stared at her, eyes widening with shock, as though unable to understand why a starving woman would choose to save a stranger instead of herself. "There is a shop just ahead," she said softly. "They will give you water." He opened his mouth to speak, perhaps to protest, perhaps to thank her, but Amina stood up quickly, unwilling to hear gratitude she didn't feel worthy of. She brushed the dust from her skirt and turned away, her hunger now replaced by an unexpected ache, not regret, but a strange sense of loss, as though something precious had just left her hands forever. She walked slowly, her body weak but her heart strangely steady. She did not look back. She did not dare to. She had given away the little she had, and now all she could do was trust that kindness, even in famine, was never wasted. But as she reached the curve in the road, the wind shifted, carrying with it a faint sound. At first, she dismissed it as leaves rustling, but then the sound came again, clearer this time. A whisper. Her name. Amina froze. Her skin prickled. She hadn't told him her name. Slowly, fear twisting inside her, she turned her head. The stranger was sitting upright now, staring directly at her with eyes no longer weak, no longer fading, eyes filled with awareness she couldn't explain. And in the still, heavy air, he whispered her name again, as though he had always known it. Amina's entire body locked in place, her breath caught somewhere between fear and disbelief. The man she had helped, weak, trembling, barely able to lift his head, had spoken her name with a certainty that didn't belong to a stranger. It wasn't a question. It wasn't a guess. It was the kind of recognition that settled deep, as though he had been waiting for her long before this moment. And suddenly, the scorching heat around her felt colder than shadow. Amina slowly turned, each step weighted with confusion. The stranger was no longer collapsed beneath the acacia tree. He was standing now, still unsteady, but upright, his posture altered as though strength had quietly returned to him. His eyes were fixed on her, not with suspicion, but with a depth she struggled to explain. They were the eyes of someone who had seen hardship, and yet knew more than he revealed. When their gazes met, something in her chest shifted, creating a tension she couldn't unravel. She had seen gratitude before, soft, humbled, relieved, but his expression held something more. There was familiarity in it, an understanding she had not earned, and a quiet awe that didn't fit the brief encounter they had shared. Amina wrapped her arms around herself instinctively, as though shielding her heart from a truth she didn't yet know. "You shouldn't have given me your last coin," he said gently, his voice steadier now. "Kindness like yours, it carries a weight you may not understand today." His words weren't flattery. They felt like an observation, spoken with the solemnity of someone who had witnessed the rarest parts of human nature. Amina opened her mouth to respond, to ask how he knew her name, but her voice tangled around her breath. Before she could gather her courage, a commotion stirred down the road. Villagers moving carts, goats scattering across the narrow path, children running toward the nearest water stand. For a moment, Amina glanced away, distracted by the noise. When she turned back to the stranger, he was gone, vanished, not walking, not stumbling away. Gone, swallowed by the movement of the crowd as though he had never been standing there at all. Amina felt herself shiver despite the heat. She clutched her arms, confusion swirling through her like dust in the wind. She searched the area, scanning faces, scanning shadows. Nothing. It was as though the earth itself had lifted him away. With a dry throat and a heart that refused to settle, she continued her walk home, every step heavy with the echo of him whispering her name. Inside her small mud-brick house, she tried to distract herself by sweeping the floor, arranging her mother's old utensils and folding the faded cloth that served as her bed cover. But no matter how many times she tried to push the memory aside, the stranger's voice resurfaced in her mind with unsettling clarity. His tone, his expression, his sudden strength, and the impossible question, how did he know her name? The sun melted into twilight, casting long shadows through the gaps in her wooden door. Amina lit her small oil lamp, its soft glow filling the room with a quiet warmth that could not ease her thoughts. She told herself it was nothing. Maybe he had heard someone call her earlier. Maybe exhaustion had made her imagine the certainty in his voice. Maybe the world was simply playing tricks on a hungry mind. But her heart didn't agree. Something about the encounter felt intentional, like a thread subtly pulled by unseen hands. Later that night, as she stepped outside to pour away a bowl of water, her foot brushed against something soft on the ground. She bent down slowly, the dim lantern light flickering across the dirt until it revealed a folded piece of paper, clean, crisp, untouched by dust, as though placed only moments before she opened the door. Amina's breath quickened. No one ever left notes in this part of the village. With trembling hands, she unfolded it carefully. The message was startlingly brief, just an address, unfamiliar, written in bold strokes, and beneath it, a single line that made her heart throb with both dread and hope. "Come tomorrow. Your life is waiting." Amina pressed the note to her chest, feeling its weight like a heartbeat that wasn't hers. Someone knew her. Someone was calling her. And tomorrow, she would have to choose whether to answer, or to run. The first light of dawn washed over the quiet street as Amina stood frozen before the tall iron gates, her breath trembling in the cool morning air. She clutched the note in her hand so tightly its edges had begun to soften. She had walked miles through unfamiliar roads to reach this address, expecting perhaps a small house, a shop, a forgotten corner of town. But instead, she was met with an estate so vast, so elegant, it felt like staring into a world she had never been allowed to imagine for herself. Fear tightened her chest. Curiosity pushed back. And between those two forces, she hovered, caught in the moment where destiny waits to see if you will step forward or turn away. The estate rose behind the gates like something carved from a dream. High walls lined with vines, smooth stone pillars gleaming in the early light, and windows polished until they mirrored the sky. It was impossible to reconcile this place with her life of cracked walls and dusty floors. She took a hesitant step back, her heart whispering that she did not belong here. This was a place for people with full pockets, soft hands, and lives untouched by the hunger she had known all her life. What business did she have standing here with her worn sandals and trembling hope? But the note had been addressed to her, and the stranger, who had somehow known her name, had asked her to come. If she turned back now, she might spend a lifetime wondering what could have been. Before she could decide, the iron gate clicked softly. Amina flinched as it opened just enough for a woman in a crisp uniform to step forward. The woman's expression did not hold suspicion or judgment, only a quiet certainty that unsettled Amina. She clasped her hands respectfully. "Amina?" the woman asked gently, as though she had been expecting her all along. Amina's voice failed her. She nodded instead. "Please come in. We were told to expect you." "We," not I, not someone. "We." The word wrapped around Amina with both comfort and unease. She followed the woman through the gate, her feet moving before her thoughts could catch up. The gravel path beneath her sandals crunched softly, leading her deeper into a place that felt more like a different life than a different home. As they walked, Amina glanced around with widening eyes. The estate grounds stretched endlessly, lush gardens blooming with flowers she had never seen, stone benches carved with elegant patterns, fountains catching the sunrise and scattering it into fragments of light. Everything felt impossibly quiet, as though sound itself refused to disturb the serenity of this world. "You don't have to be afraid," the woman said warmly, perhaps sensing her nerves. "He asked for you the moment he arrived." Amina stumbled slightly. The man from yesterday?" "Yes," the woman said with a small smile. "He requested you personally." Requested. Not invited. Not asked. Requested, like someone choosing deliberately, purposefully. Amina didn't know whether to feel honored or unsettled. Inside the estate, the air shifted again, cooler, stiller, carrying the faint scent of polished wood and freshly cleaned floors. The hallways were wide, their walls lined with portraits, paintings and framed photographs of people she did not recognize. Some wore formal attire, others were captured mid-laughter or mid-achievement. Awards gleamed beneath small display lights, their inscriptions sharp and intimidating, full of words she could not pronounce. She slowed with every step, overwhelmed. Who was this man she had helped? What world had she stepped into? And why would someone like him summon someone like her? The woman guiding her seemed unfazed by Amina's shock. They walked past room after room, libraries with towering shelves, sitting rooms furnished with fabrics so rich they seemed to glow, hallways long enough to feel like stories themselves. Amina felt smaller with every turn, the edges of her old life slipping further behind her. Yet, beneath the unease, something stirred, a whisper of possibility, a pulse of change. Every step she took felt like stepping out of the version of herself she had known for years, and into another she could not yet see clearly. Finally, they stopped before a tall wooden door, its intricate carvings catching the morning light. The woman placed a hand on it, turning to Amina with a reassuring nod. "He's waiting inside." Amina swallowed hard, her heart pounding so fiercely she feared it might betray her fear. She closed her eyes for a moment, steadying her breath. Poverty had taught her endurance, hardship had taught her courage, and kindness, her last coin, had brought her here. Maybe fate was not testing her. Maybe it was inviting her. The door opened softly, and there he was, the stranger, no longer weak, no longer trembling. He stood tall, composed, his presence commanding yet gentle, his eyes holding a knowing depth that made her breath hitch. Amina froze in the doorway as he looked at her, not like a girl from the streets, but like someone he had been waiting for. And before she could move, he spoke her name again, this time with a familiarity that promised her life was about to change forever. Amina stood rooted in place, unable to reconcile the man before her with the exhausted stranger she had lifted from the roadside. His posture now carried a calm power, the kind that didn't need to boast to be felt. His eyes were steady, clearer than before, holding a quiet certainty that reached her long before his words did. Something inside her shifted, an instinctive awareness that she had stepped into a moment that would alter the rhythm of her entire life. The room around them seemed to fade as he took a slow step closer, not imposing, but intentional. Amina felt her pulse quicken, not from fear, but from the overwhelming sense that the truth she was about to hear would stretch far beyond the small life she had known. He began with gratitude, not in the hollow way people sometimes spoke when courtesy was expected, but with a sincerity that warmed the air between them. He told her that the coin she had given was not merely money. It was dignity, hope, a reminder that humanity still lived in places he thought he had lost sight of. His voice softened when he described those moments she had offered kindness freely, her empty pockets still open, her heart still willing. Amina listened, a mixture of confusion and humility tightening in her chest. She had thought so little of that moment. To her, it had been instinct, the simple choice between keeping a last coin or answering the ache she saw in a stranger's eyes. She never expected it to be remembered, certainly not like this. But then he said something that made the floor beneath her feel unsteady. "I wasn't lost," he admitted quietly. The words landed softly, but carried the weight of a secret that demanded more explanation than he initially offered. Amina frowned slightly, trying to understand. He continued, explaining that he had been walking through the community by choice, not by circumstance, observing, listening, searching, not for help, but for something genuine in a world that often wrapped its intentions in masks. Her kindness, he said, had found him before he found her. She felt her breath halt for a moment. She had not imagined her life remarkable. She had not thought anyone would notice her quiet resilience, her small acts of care woven between long days of survival. Yet this man spoke as though her compassion had struck him with enough force to alter the path he walked. His gaze was unwavering as he told her she was one of the few people he had ever met, whose heart acted before fear could stop it. Amina lowered her eyes, overwhelmed. She clutched her hands together, unsure how to respond to praise that felt far larger than the life she lived. Then, with a steadiness that sent a ripple of tension through the room, he revealed the part that unsettled her most. He had chosen her, not out of desperation, not out of circumstance, but deliberately. For something greater, he said, his voice nearly a whisper. Before she could question him, he reached into his coat and drew out a sealed envelope, smooth, thick, with her name written in flowing ink she had never seen on anything addressed to her. The sight of it alone felt surreal, as though destiny itself had been folded inside its corners. He extended it to her gently, his expression carrying both gratitude and something deeper, something she couldn't quite name. It wasn't expectation in the sense of pressure. It was expectation in the sense of belief. He believed she was capable of receiving whatever truth waited inside that envelope. And that belief alone felt almost too heavy to hold. Amina hesitated, staring at her name, at the ink that curved with impossible elegance. Her life had been built on rationing, food, hope, dreams. Now she was being handed something that felt too large to take without trembling. She finally lifted her gaze to his, searching for some explanation, some assurance that she was not stepping into a world meant for someone far more deserving. He must have sensed her doubt, because he took a small step back, giving her space as he spoke again, this time with a softness that carried both warning and encouragement. "Before you open it," he murmured, his voice wrapped in quiet promise. "Promise me you will not think your life is too small for what's inside. Because the truth, Amina," he paused, his eyes locking with hers, "is that your story is only just beginning." Amina slid her thumb beneath the envelope's seal with the caution of someone afraid to damage something far too precious to belong to her. She expected a polite thank you note, maybe a brief expression of gratitude. Nothing more. But as the paper unfolded and the first line surfaced beneath her shaking gaze, her breath hitched, then vanished altogether. Her knees threatened to give way, as though the ground beneath her had shifted without warning. She gripped the edge of the desk to steady herself, her heart thundering louder than the silence that filled the room. Whatever she thought her life was, whatever path she believed she was meant to walk, had just been rewritten in a single sentence. Inside the envelope was not gratitude. It was a doorway. She read the letter again, slower this time, her eyes widening as reality began to settle. It wasn't a dream. It wasn't a mistake. It wasn't a misunderstanding dressed in beautiful words. It was a full scholarship. To one of the most prestigious academies in the region, an institution she had only heard whispered about in the distant conversations of people born into possibility. It included everything she had never dared to imagine: housing, meals, books, a stipend for her daily needs, and a personal mentor assigned solely to guide her future. Amina blinked hard, as if trying to clear the fog of disbelief clouding her mind. The room seemed to tilt. Her voice, small and fragile, finally escaped in a soft whisper. This cannot be for me." The stranger, now composed, steady, and far removed from the man she had seen collapsed on the roadside, watched her with the calm patience of someone who understood the storm inside her. There was no surprise on his face, no amusement, only a gentle certainty. "It is yours," he said, stepping closer but not imposing. "Every word of it." Amina shook her head instinctively. She had spent her entire life stitching survival together with quiet resilience. Opportunities like this belonged to other people, to the children of wealth, the ones who never had to count coins before eating, the ones who carried dreams instead of responsibilities. What chance did a girl like her have in a world built for privilege? The stranger seemed to read those doubts as clearly as the letter in her trembling hands. "You're imagining reasons you don't deserve it," he said, his tone neither harsh nor condescending. "But your kindness revealed what I needed to know. You gave away your last coin without hesitation. That told me more about your character than any application ever could." Amina swallowed hard. Her throat felt tight, thick with emotions she couldn't name. Gratitude, disbelief, fear, and a fragile hope that frightened her more than any hardship she had endured. He continued, "I fund individuals who have potential the world ignores. Talent is everywhere, Amina, but opportunity is not. You saw a man in need and acted without weighing what you might lose. That kind of heart builds futures worth investing in." His words washed over her like warm rain after years of drought, but she still felt unsteady, unsure whether stepping forward would lead to new light or unfamiliar shadows. She looked down at the packet, pages explaining the academy's programs, photographs of classrooms that looked nothing like the worn walls of her old school, lists of students who had risen from poverty into leadership. She touched a glossy page featuring the dormitory, unable to believe she was meant to live anywhere so clean, so structured, so full of promise. "Why me?" she whispered. "Because you haven't let the world harden you," he answered simply. Compassion is a strength most people lose when life gets difficult. But yours didn't fade. It grew. Her eyes stung with unshed tears. She brushed them away, embarrassed. But he shook his head gently. "Tears don't make you weak," he said. "They mean the dream is bigger than what you thought your life could hold." In the silence that followed, he placed a pen on the table beside the acceptance forms. Amina reached out slowly, her fingers brushing the paper with reverence, as if signing her name might cause the fragile magic of the moment to shatter. But she signed anyway, hands trembling, heart pounding, breath unsteady. Her name, written in ink, felt like a promise, a beginning. The stranger watched her with quiet pride, but just as she lifted her head, relief warming her chest, his expression shifted, subtle, almost shadowed. And as she placed the pen down, he spoke in a tone that made the air grow still. "Remember this moment, Amina. Blessings attract shadows. Be ready for what comes next." The academy rose before Amina like a world carved from dreams she had never allowed herself to imagine. Tall glass buildings glowing beneath the morning sun. Students dressed in crisp uniforms moving with the confidence of those who had always known comfort. And hallways humming with ambition so thick it felt like stepping into another universe. For a moment, she hesitated at the gate, feeling unbearably small. But beneath the swirl of doubt tightening her chest, a quiet determination whispered, "You have earned the right to walk through this door." Inside, everything seemed to move too fast. Voices, filled with certainty, footsteps echoing against polished floors, laughter belonging to people untouched by the weight she had carried her whole life. Amina felt like a single raindrop, lost in a storm of brilliance. Though she tried to steady her breaths, her heart beat wildly as she clutched her schedule with trembling hands. Her first classes overwhelmed her. Other students spoke with fluency she had not learned, wrote with ease she had not practiced, and carried an inherited confidence she had never known. Their pens moved quickly across crisp pages, while Amina's hand hovered in hesitation, afraid of writing the wrong thing, afraid of being noticed, afraid of being invisible. But she refused to shrink. Each challenge became a quiet battle she fought with grit, showing up early, staying late, and rereading lessons until exhaustion softened into clarity. Still, the weight of inadequacy clung to her, until her mentor stepped in. Sisypheus, a poised woman with steady eyes and a voice that carried calm authority, noticed Amina's struggles before she ever spoke of them. Rather than overwhelm her with criticism, she guided her gently, helping her untangle complex lessons, showing her how to breathe through panic, teaching her to trust herself, even when doubt rattled her bones. In her presence, Amina learned the quiet value of patience, the kind that nurtures growth rather than demand perfection. As days turned to weeks, something remarkable began to unfold. Amina discovered abilities she never knew she possessed. She excelled in analytical subjects, surprising her instructors with sharp insights rooted in real-life observation rather than theory. She grew confident in discussions, her voice steadying as classmates leaned in to hear her perspective. Her kindness, so natural it required no effort, earned her friends who valued her warmth in a place often cold with competition. They admired how she listened, how she lifted others without dimming herself, how she remained gentle without losing strength. Slowly, the academy stopped feeling like a world she was intruding on, and began feeling like a world she was shaping alongside others. Her days were filled with small victories, a perfect grade on a difficult assignment, a moment when classmates applauded her answer, a quiet compliment from a teacher who saw her potential. Each win stitched confidence into the corners of her heart that had long been empty. But growth is never without shadows. Even as she flourished, Amina began to sense something unsettling, an awareness pressing against her back when she walked through hallways, a pair of eyes lingering too long during assemblies, a silence that felt heavy rather than neutral. At first, she dismissed it as imagination born from insecurity. But the sensation persisted. Someone was watching her, not with admiration, but with an intent she couldn't quite decipher. One afternoon, she caught a glimpse of a figure turning away the moment she looked up. They disappeared before she could recognize them, leaving behind a sharp chill that trailed her through the day. The feeling grew stronger in the weeks that followed, shadowing her triumphs with an unfamiliar unease. Yet she didn't let fear claim her progress. Amina kept studying, kept showing up, kept proving to herself that she belonged not because someone allowed her to, but because she had earned her place through courage and effort. Her friendships deepened. Her mentor praised her dedication, and even the stranger who had once collapsed on the roadside heard glowing reports of her transformation. But still, that watchful presence lingered. One evening, after a long study session, Amina returned to her dorm. The hallway was unusually quiet, the air too still for comfort. She unlocked her door and stepped inside, only to stop abruptly. Something lay on the floor beneath her window, a folded slip of paper, crisp, deliberate, waiting. Her heart thudded as she approached and picked it up, the weight of unseen eyes prickling the back of her neck. She unfolded it slowly, bracing herself without knowing why. The note contained only 4 words, sharp, cold, and meant to cut. "You don't belong here." Amina stared at the message as the room seemed to darken around her. Someone had been watching. Someone wanted her gone. But the real question pressed into her chest like a warning. Who had decided her destiny was not hers to claim? And why? For a long moment, Amina stood frozen, staring at the jagged handwriting that curled across the paper like a warning carved with intention. The message was short, but its silence screamed louder than the words themselves. "You don't belong here." The letters felt cold beneath her fingertips, as if the ink itself carried someone's bitterness. She felt something inside her tighten, fear, confusion, and something deeper. A quiet ache she had fought her entire life, the fear of being unworthy. She folded the paper quickly, almost defensively, as though hiding it would protect her from the sting it carried. She refused to let her mentor see it, not because she wanted to be strong, but because she could not bear the thought of becoming a burden to the person who believed in her so fiercely. She tucked the note beneath her pillow, though the weight of it pressed against her mind for the rest of the night. In the days that followed, the academy buzzed with attention sharper than usual. Exams were nearing, competitions were intensifying, and the hallways filled with a pressure that clung to every student like a second skin. Amina noticed strained smiles, harsh whispers, and footsteps that echoed with urgency. She tried to ignore the growing sense of unease that hovered beneath her achievements, but doubt kept creeping in, quiet and persistent. Then, one afternoon in the library, she overheard 2 students speaking in hushed tones behind a tall shelf. "She doesn't deserve that scholarship," one muttered. "She came from nowhere," the other replied. "People like her don't rise that fast, unless they have help." Their words sliced into her, even though she pretended not to hear them. She kept her gaze on her textbook, but the sentences blurred as their voices replayed in her mind. Suddenly, the anonymous message made horrible sense. Someone here envied her progress. Someone believed she did not earn her place. Someone wanted her to fail, but she would not hand them that victory. Amina lifted her chin and returned to her studies with renewed focus. She spent early mornings in the library, late nights reviewing assignments, and quiet lunchtime hours practicing skills she once struggled with. She reminded herself where she came from: the dusty roads, the hunger, the long nights filled with unanswered prayers, and she used that memory as fuel. She would not let envy steal her future. She would not let doubt dilute her purpose. Her mentor noticed the shift, the sharpened determination in her posture, the way her voice carried a newfound steadiness during presentations. Ms. Sophia often paused mid-lesson, watching her with a proud but cautious gaze, sensing the battle Amina was fighting silently. But Amina kept her struggles tucked neatly behind her calm expression, refusing to let her inner storms dim her outward progress. Yet she could not deny that someone was watching her. Every time she walked through the courtyard, she felt a pair of eyes lingering too long. During group discussions, she occasionally caught a seat shifting behind her, as if someone had been leaning closer than necessary. Even during quiet study hours, the sensation returned, faint but unmistakable, like a thread pulling at the edge of her awareness. She didn't know if it was jealousy, malice, or something far more complicated. But she learned to move with a sharper sense of caution. She double-checked her assignments, avoided walking alone after dark, and stayed near classmates she trusted. Still, even in the tension, she grew. Her answers became more precise, her ideas more daring, her confidence more grounded. Teachers praised her for her discipline, classmates admired her resilience, and even those who wished to see her fail could not deny the brilliance unfolding within her. Amina transformed quietly, not through arrogance, but through persistence. Doubt tried to steal her light, but instead, it sharpened it. And then, one cool evening, as the sky blushed into purples and golds, the stranger appeared again. She had not seen him since her arrival at the academy, yet he stepped into the courtyard with the same calm certainty he carried the day she met him. His presence stilled the air. Students passing by instinctively lowered their voices, sensing something significant in the way he looked toward her. "Amina," he said softly, his voice steady, familiar in a way that eased the tension she'd been carrying for weeks. "Walk with me." She followed him toward a quiet path, lined with flowering shrubs, her heartbeat unsteady. He studied her face closely, as though reading the truth she'd been hiding since the message arrived. "You're stronger than the shadows trying to reach you," he said gently. "But strength should never be silent." Before she could respond, before she could tell him how hard the days had felt, he reached into his coat and handed her a sealed envelope. The paper was thick, the seal marked with deep red ink, stamped in urgency. "This," he said, his gaze holding hers with steady seriousness, "needs your attention immediately." Amina stared at the envelope, her throat tightening as her fingers closed around its weight. The word urgent, marked across the seal, seemed to pulse beneath her touch, warning, promising, and threatening all at once. Whatever waited inside was not just important. It was life-changing. Amina unfolded the urgent letter with trembling hands, expecting perhaps another task, another evaluation, another warning. But the first line struck her so abruptly that her breath caught before she could steady herself. The words seemed to pulse against the page, raw and undeniable, an emergency calling her by name. Something had happened, something irreversible, something that reached toward her from a world she barely understood, yet was now undeniably part of. And in that moment, the academy, the noise, the doubt, all of it dissolved into the background of a single truth. She was needed. The letter bore the insignia of the foundation, an emblem she had come to associate with opportunity, guidance, and the quiet strength of the man who first saw promise in her. But it wasn't his handwriting. The message was written by a caretaker, the strokes hurried and heavy with distress. The founder, the stranger's mentor, the visionary behind the humanitarian empire that had changed thousands of lives, had fallen gravely ill. His condition was worsening by the hour, and though dozens of esteemed leaders, mentees, and prominent figures were connected to him, he requested only one person: her. Amina reread the line twice. "He wants to see you. Immediately." Confusion rippled through her. Why her? Why now? She barely understood the Foundation's full structure, yet he had called specifically for the girl who once walked dusty roads with empty pockets and too many unanswered questions. But before fear could anchor her, determination rose. She grabbed her scarf, her bag, and hurried out of the academy with a heart pounding in sharp, uneven beats. The private hospital stood quietly at the edge of the city, its glass reflecting the evening light in soft blues and gentle silvers. Inside, everything smelled of sterilized air and subdued conversations. Amina felt small in the polished corridors, their stillness amplifying the weight of the moment pressing against her chest. A nurse guided her through a series of turns until they reached a door marked by a single name, Aisha, name the world respected, a name she had once found unattainably distant. But now, he was waiting for her. When she entered the dimly lit room, she paused. The man who had shaped countless futures lay frail beneath white sheets, his breathing uneven, but his eyes sharp with awareness. He looked older than she remembered, thinner, quieter, but there was a light in his gaze that felt familiar. A light she had seen in the stranger the day he valued her last coin, more than she could understand. As she stepped closer, he raised a trembling hand slightly, urging her forward. "Amina," he whispered, his voice roughened by pain, but carrying a tenderness that settled deeply into her. "You came." She swallowed hard, unsure whether to speak or simply stay present. He studied her quietly, as though absorbing every detail of her face, committing it to memory. "You remind me so much." He paused to steady his breath. "So much of my daughter." Amina's heart tightened. She had heard whispers that he once had a child, brilliant, compassionate, gone too soon. But hearing it from him, spoken with a grief softened only by years of remembrance, made it feel heartbreakingly real. "Your kindness," he continued, "is something the world rarely offers freely anymore. When I heard what you did for that stranger, when I saw the sincerity in your actions, I knew you carried the same heart she once had." Amina lowered her gaze, emotions swirling beneath her ribs in ways she could not name. She felt honored, humbled, and deeply uncertain of why he would draw such a connection between them. But he reached for her hand, his touch light yet filled with conviction. "I did not build the Foundation only to help people," he said slowly. "I built it hoping someone would one day lead with compassion stronger than power, with humility strong enough to guide nations, with vision unclouded by greed." His breaths grew shorter, each word requiring effort, but he pressed on. "And I believe," he whispered, "that person is you." Amina froze. The world inside her chest seemed to still as his words spread through her, transforming disbelief into something she wasn't yet ready to name. Led. Her. She had come from nothing. She was still learning, still growing, still finding her place. How could someone like her carry the weight of the programs he had built over decades? "I don't know if I'm ready," she whispered, almost afraid to break the fragile quiet surrounding his confession. "No one ever is," he replied gently. "But destiny rarely honors readiness. It honors spirit." He reached toward the bedside drawer with a shaking hand, retrieving a small polished silver key. The metal glimmered faintly beneath the light, holding an importance she couldn't fully grasp. "Everything I've built," he murmured, "needs a heart that understands people, not just systems. A heart like yours." His hand closed around hers, pressing the key into her palm. The weight of it felt heavier than its size, heavy with responsibility, legacy, and the unspoken trust of a man nearing the edge of his journey. "Amina," he whispered, a soft tremor threading through his voice. "This unlocks your destiny." She stared at the key, feeling its cold surface warm slowly against her skin, feeling doors she had never imagined begin to shift open. But before she could speak, before she could ask why his grip tightened faintly, urging her to listen to the final truth he needed her to hear. The truth that would test everything she believed she was capable of becoming. Amina stood in the quiet hallway, long after the founder's final words settled into her spirit, the silver key resting in her palm, like a living heartbeat. She didn't know what it unlocked, only that the weight of it felt strangely familiar, like a promise she had unknowingly been walking toward all her life. When she finally followed its pull, her steps led her deeper into the Foundation's headquarters, down a corridor she had never seen, toward a door marked with no name, only a small silver lock waiting for her. The key slid in easily, as though it had been crafted for her fingers alone. The door opened with a soft click, revealing a private office unlike any space she had ever entered. Warm sunlight filtered through large windows, casting gentle patterns across shelves lined with binders, journals, and maps marked with red pins. A large desk sat at the center, covered with neatly organized files, plans, proposals, handwritten notes, and vision outlines that spanned continents. It was a room built for designing change, for imagining new futures. And until this moment, it had belonged to the founder alone. A single envelope lay on the desk. Her name was written in ink that carried the delicate tremble of a man who had written his final letter. Her breath deepened as she sat down, letting the chair embrace her with a familiarity that startled her. She opened the envelope carefully, as though afraid the paper might crumble beneath her fingers. The letter began simply, yet carried a gravity that reached straight into the deepest part of her heart. He explained everything, how he had searched for years for someone who led, not with brilliance alone, but with compassion. Someone who saw dignity before numbers, people before systems, truth before prestige. He wrote of watching her kindness ripple outward from the smallest moment, the moment she gave her last coin to a stranger. He wrote of knowing instantly that her heart held the power to shift entire communities, the strength to guide programs that touched thousands of vulnerable lives. He wrote of choosing her not out of sympathy, but out of conviction. And then the final lines shattered the last of her doubts. Amina, the Foundation is yours now. Lead it with the heart that saved me that day. Lead it with the courage you don't yet know you carry. The world needs your light. And you were born for this. Tears warmed her cheeks, not from fear, but from a rising sense of responsibility so profound it felt like destiny settling neatly into place. She closed the letter, pressing it gently against her chest as the truth sank in. She had been entrusted with a mission larger than herself, larger than her past, larger than the shadows she once believed defined her. Instead of trembling, she inhaled deeply and stood. Purpose aligned her spine. Determination steadied her breath. The girl who once hid her hunger from the world now stepped into leadership shaped entirely by compassion. In the days that followed, Amina immersed herself in every document in the private office. She studied the programs, visited field projects, listened to testimonies from families who had been lifted from crisis. She met with staff, not from behind desks, but among them, sitting in circles, hearing their challenges, asking what they needed to serve better. Her humility disarmed them. Her sharp insight impressed them. Her quiet resolve guided them. Slowly, she began restructuring programs with a vision rooted in kindness and long-term sustainability. She expanded outreach to communities overlooked in previous cycles, streamlined emergency aid, strengthened youth mentorship branches, and created new initiatives focused on women and children living in extreme poverty. She traveled across regions, mud roads, city highways, mountain paths, carrying notebooks full of ideas and a heart full of responsibility. Everywhere she went, people felt her sincerity. They trusted her, not because of her title, but because she listened, deeply, attentively, respectfully. She carried the founder's wisdom, but added her own warmth, her own empathy, her own grit shaped by the life she had survived. News of her leadership spread quietly, but steadily. Community leaders spoke of the young woman who understands us. Elders praised her for leading without ego. Mothers blessed her name. Children ran toward her with hope shining in their eyes. Her story, once hidden in poverty, began touching hearts far beyond her birthplace. But despite the growing recognition, Amina remained grounded. Each night, she returned to the private office, her sanctuary of responsibility. She reviewed plans, updated timelines, and whispered gratitude for the journey that had brought her here. Every step she took felt like honoring the woman she had been, the stranger she had helped, the mentor who had believed in her, and the destiny unfolding beneath her feet. Then, one late evening, as the office lamps cast soft pools of light across the desk, she noticed a new file. It hadn't been there that morning. Her breath paused as she reached for it, fingertips brushing over the simple label taped to the front. There was only one word: her birthplace. A chill of recognition traveled through her as she opened the file to the first page. Because whatever waited, inside was not just part of her mission, it was part of her past. And she felt, with an instinct deep as bone, that everything she thought she understood about her life was about to change. The moment Amina stepped off the dusty bus and felt the earth of her village beneath her feet again, a wave of emotion rose so sharply in her chest that she had to pause just to steady her breath. She had left this place with empty pockets and a quietly breaking spirit. Yet now she returned carrying blessings so vast they barely fit inside her heart. For the first time since her life had changed, she felt the weight of the journey behind her, and the pull of the soil that had shaped her. The air smelled the same, warm, earthy, touched by distant cooking fires and the soft rustle of acacia trees, but everything felt different. Children who once ran barefoot across the fields now sprinted toward her with wide, disbelieving eyes. The elders sitting beneath the old baobab tree stood slowly, their faces stretching into smiles that trembled with pride. Women carrying baskets paused mid-step, gasping softly as they recognized the young girl who had once fetched water at dawn, the girl who had once worked odd jobs to survive, the girl whose kindness had changed the course of her life. But today, Amina didn't return as the girl they remembered. She returned as the woman she had fought to become. Steady, compassionate, purpose-bound. The first place she visited was the broken schoolhouse she had once longed to attend. Its cracked walls and rusted roof had kept generations of children from believing in a future beyond the village. Now, funded through her foundation, the school stood reborn, fresh paint gleaming, books stacked neatly, desks lined in rows that invited dreams to sit down and begin. When the children rushed inside to show her their new classrooms, their laughter echoed through the building like a chorus of futures returning home to bloom. Next, she walked to the small clinic that had once been nothing more than a single room and a few faded supplies. She remembered standing outside it as a child, hoping her mother's cough would be treated, only to learn there was no medicine left. But now, the clinic thrived, solar-powered, staffed, stocked, and buzzing with quiet efficiency. Mothers held healthy infants. Patients waited under shade, confident that care would reach them. Nurses greeted her with warm smiles, thanking her for restoring dignity to a place where suffering once lingered too long. The water system came last. Amina traced the path she used to walk every morning, long, draining, and dangerous, to reach the old well far beyond the village. She remembered the weight of the jerry can, the way her shoulders ached, the way the sun felt merciless even before noon. Now, tall and gleaming, a new water tower stood at the heart of the community. Clean water flowed from multiple taps, children filling buckets with ease, elders blessing the fresh, stream with whispered gratitude. For the first time, water was not a burden. It was a gift. Everywhere she turned, villagers embraced her in ways that pierced her heart gently. Old women placed their palms on her head in prayer. Men clasped her hands with pride that softened their voices. Children tugged at her clothes, asking how she became so brave, so strong, So magical. She didn't feel magical. She felt thankful, and sometimes overwhelmed, especially when she sat alone beneath the same baobab tree where she once hid from hunger and fear. Its branches stretched wide above her, shading her like an old friend, reminding her that every step forward had been carved from moments that once felt unbearable. She thought of the stranger, the weary man who had collapsed on the roadside, the one who had spoken her name without asking, the one who had opened the door that changed her life. She wondered where he was now, whether he knew that a single act of kindness had blossomed into a lifetime of blessings. As the sun dipped lower, casting warm orange light across the village, Amina felt a fullness settle inside her, a quiet peace she had never known before. She had returned not to show what she had achieved, but to restore the soil that had raised her, to honor the place that birthed her resilience, to give back what life had struggled to offer her once. The villagers gathered around her as the evening softened, their gratitude thick enough to feel in the air. Amina smiled, humbled beyond words. She didn't think she could feel any deeper emotion, until she noticed movement at the edge of the crowd. A small child stepped forward, barefoot, dust on his skin, eyes wide with something she recognized instantly, hope mixed with fear. He held out his hand, and resting quietly in his palm was a single coin. Amina stared at the coin, her breath catching as a shiver of déjà vu swept through her, because she knew, with a certainty that tightened her heart, that destiny was circling back to her once more, carrying a message she wasn't yet ready to understand. The little girl stepped toward Amina with hesitant footsteps, dust clinging to her ankles, small fingers curled tightly around a single coin. Her lower lip trembled as she lifted the coin with both hands, hands too young to understand sacrifice, and whispered, "Please help my mother." The words struck Amina with such force that the world around her seemed to hush, the marketplace sounds fading into a distant hum. It felt as if time itself had folded, returning her to the version of herself who once stood in the same desperation, offering the last thing she owned in hope that someone, anyone, might care. Amina knelt slowly, lowering herself until she was eye level with the child. She could see fear swimming in the girl's wide eyes, fear layered with a fragile courage that reminded her painfully of her younger self. The coin, warm from the girl's trembling palm, gleamed faintly in the sunlight. It wasn't just currency. It was trust, pleading, and a silent cry for mercy wrapped inside metal no bigger than a thumbprint. Amina took a steady breath, her heartbeat tightening as emotion swelled inside her, like an unstoppable tide. Gently, she placed her hands over the girl's. "Keep your coin," she whispered, her voice soft yet steady. "You don't owe me anything. I'm here to help you." Relief flickered in the child's eyes, followed quickly by confusion, as though kindness this pure felt unfamiliar, almost unbelievable. Amina rose and signaled to her team members standing nearby, professionals trained not just for logistics, but for compassion. They moved quickly, gathering supplies, adjusting plans, preparing to follow the girl to wherever home waited, whether it was a hut made of tin sheets, a collapsing mud structure, or a shaded corner of the village where survival balanced on fragile threads. The little girl led them through winding footpaths, her steps quick with urgency. Amina's heart clenched deeper with each turn. The landscape became brutally familiar. Homes patched with cloth, empty cooking pots, children with silent eyes watching from doorways. This was a neighborhood she had once walked barefoot through, where every day demanded choices between hunger and hope, between staying alive and staying soft-hearted. She had once lived this truth. Now she was returning not as the one who suffered, but as the one who could lift. When they reached the girl's home, Amina felt the air shift. The mother lay on a thin mat, her breath shallow, skin pale with exhaustion and malnourishment. Her eyes fluttered open as the team approached, revealing a mixture of embarrassment, fear, and gratitude. Amina knelt beside her, recognizing instantly the same quiet endurance she had once seen in her own mother. The strength of women who suffered in silence, so their children might suffer less. The resemblance to her past was so sharp, it almost hurt. She held the woman's hand gently, speaking with a warmth that wrapped around the room like a promise. "You're not alone anymore," she said. "We will rebuild everything with you, not for you." Medical aid was provided immediately. Food supplies filled the small home within minutes. Arrangements were made for long-term support, new housing, job placement, education for the child, and monthly stability until the family found their footing. Each step was handled with care, dignity, and patience. Amina supervised everything, refusing to move until she saw color return to the woman's cheeks, strength return to her voice, and relief settle into the little girl's posture, like a long-awaited exhale. As the day softened into evening, Amina walked back toward the village square, her steps slow, thoughtful, heavy with reflection. She felt something shift inside her, something quiet and powerful. Helping this family didn't feel like charity. It didn't feel like duty. It felt like destiny, revealing the reason behind every struggle she had ever endured. This wasn't random. This wasn't a coincidence. This purpose arrived in full circle, life whispering that her story had never been about rising alone, but about rising so she could reach back for those still trapped in the shadows she escaped. She paused beneath the baobab tree, the same spot where she had once hidden her tears, her dreams, and her hunger. Now she felt none of that heaviness. She felt grounded, clear, deeply aligned with the path unfolding before her. But as she lifted her gaze, ready to return to her team, her body halted. Someone stood at the far end of the road, a lone figure. Still, watching her. The shape was familiar, unsettlingly familiar. Her breath caught as the sinking sun stretched the figure's shadow toward her, long and deliberate, as if carrying a message from the past she thought she fully understood. And in that still, breathless moment, Amina realized she knew that silhouette. Someone she once trusted, or someone she once feared, had followed her home. Amina's breath caught as the familiar silhouette stepped out from the fading shadows, the soft glow of dusk outlining his features like a memory returning home. The same stranger, the man she had once given her last coin to, stood before her now, with a gentle, knowing smile. It wasn't dramatic or imposing. It was warm, steady, and filled with quiet pride, as though he had been waiting for this moment far longer than she realized. And in that heartbeat, the years between their first meeting and now folded into a single, breathtaking truth. Her journey had never been walked alone. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The air between them held a stillness shaped by reflection, gratitude, and the unspoken weight of shared destiny. Amina stepped closer, studying him with a mixture of surprise and clarity. He no longer looked like the weary, lost man she had once helped on a dusty roadside. His presence was grounded, composed, carrying the unmistakable air of someone who had walked through storms and learned to rise above them. Yet his eyes remained the same, kind, observant, quietly searching for hearts the world ignored. "You," she whispered, her voice trembling gently. "It's really you." He nodded, his smile widening with a softness only sincerity could shape. "I never stopped watching over you, Amina. Not to control, not to judge, only to witness the extraordinary path you were always meant to walk." His words settled into her like a warm tide. She felt the tension she carried loosen, replaced by a deep, humbling gratitude. She thought of the letter he had given her, the opportunities he opened, the warnings he whispered, the doors he guided her toward without ever stepping in front of her. He had always walked beside her, seen and unseen. "I don't know how to thank you," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "You believed in someone the world overlooked, someone who didn't even know how to dream properly." He shook his head gently. "No, Amina. You were never overlooked. only undiscovered. Some people shine quietly, waiting for the right moment to be seen. My role was never to give you a future. It was only to help you step into the one you were already carrying." The words wrapped around her like a truth she didn't know she needed. She felt a rush of memories. The hunger, the fear, the small kindness she once offered without expectation, the opportunities that followed, the battles she fought at the academy, the foundation she rebuilt, the families she lifted, the child she had just rescued. All of it felt like a tapestry woven from threads she hadn't known she possessed. They walked together through the village, their steps slow, unhurried. The sky deepened into shades of indigo and rose, cradling the moment with a serene glow. As they moved past the new school she built, the repaired water well, the blooming community gardens, the stranger spoke with a gentle reverence. "You've done more than I ever imagined," he said. "Every space you touched grew softer. Every life you reached found room to breathe again. You didn't just rise. You lifted." Amina exhaled, letting the words sink in. "I only did for others what someone once did for me." "That," he replied quietly, "is why you were chosen." They stopped near a group of children playing beneath lanterns, their laughter echoing through the evening like a promise. Amina watched them with a tenderness that deepened into purpose. She realized then that her journey had stretched far beyond personal success. She wasn't meant to simply become a leader. She was meant to become a guardian of kindness, a vessel through which blessings could flow. The stranger stepped beside her, his voice low, full of meaning. "I have a new vision, and I want you to lead it with me. Not for one village, not for one community, for every child who waits in hunger, in fear, in silence. Blessings don't belong in storage rooms. They belong in hands like yours, hands that give without expecting return." Amina felt a quiet fire rise within her. The idea was huge, overwhelming, breathtaking. But it felt right. It felt earned. It felt destined. They spent hours planning. Global outreach teams, mobile support units, village-to-city mentorship chains, programs designed to turn kindness into generational change. A new movement was being born, shaped not by power or resources, but by the simple miracle of compassion shared at the right moment. In the weeks that followed, Amina became a beacon of hope across nations. Her name traveled through communities like a soft torchlight, leading the lost home. Families spoke of her with gratitude. Leaders sought her wisdom. Children held her hand with trust. The world seemed to expand its heart wherever her footsteps passed. But even as her influence grew, Amina remained grounded, humble, steady, unshaken by fame. Because she knew, everything began with a single act of kindness. A single coin, a single choice to give even when she had nothing. And somewhere nearby, hidden behind the glow of lanterns and the hum of evening, another struggling soul watched her with quiet desperation, unaware that destiny was already reaching for them, preparing to rewrite their story next. If Amina's journey touched even a corner of your heart, don't let her story end here. Your support helps these powerful stories reach people who need hope the most. Like, share, and subscribe to stay connected with emotional, life-changing stories every week. Tell me in the comments, which moment hit you the deepest? Your words keep this storytelling community alive. Turn on the bell icon, because the next story might be the one that inspires your destiny.